Hello, everyone. It's Francis Widdowson here. I have a special guest today. It is Albert Howard. And Albert Howard is co-author of Disrobing the Aboriginal Industry, which we wrote in 2008. It was we wrote it during 2000s, but it was published in 2008. And what I wanted to talk to you today about is the upcoming visit that is going to be happening to Thompson Rivers University. Thompson Rivers University is in Kamloops, and I was previously there with Kathy Drake and Simon Hergott. Simon Hergott, the videographer who produced What Remains. And if people haven't watched that on the Kamloops case, I think it is very, very informative about the impact of the false claim about Kamloops on the town of Powell River. Anyway, when I went to Thompson Rivers University on May 27th, which was the 4th anniversary of the false claim made by the Kamloops Indian Band, Steve Pottle, who was the director of safety, approached us when we were there doing a Spectrum Street epistemology session and told us that because we were on the first house of the Kamloops, which is the Kamloops Indian Band, we should not be allowed to discuss the unmarked graves. And I thought that was a shocking kind of thing for a university administrator to say. And we all just stayed there and said, we are not going anywhere. We are upholding the mission, the academic mission of Thompson Rivers University. And therefore, we're going to stay here and you do what you have to do, but we're not going anywhere. Anyway, they disappeared, the administrators. But on October 15th, they sent me in by email a trespass note. Authorization from them. I would not be allowed to be on campus. And if I did come on campus, they would declare me to be a nuisance and would pursue me to the full extent of the law. To which I respond, you do that, Thompson Rivers University, and then we'll have a discussion about how you have been fomenting the false claim about the remains of 215 children being found on the Kamloops site for the last 4 years, and that is an embarrassment for a university. Anyway, so that's the backdrop for why we are here today to talk about what's going to be happening. But I thought it would be a good idea to Albert Howard, since first of all, we had an experience at Thompson Rivers University in 2015. And secondly, I think that everything that's been happening in British Columbia and other areas of Canada, but especially British Columbia, is due to the Aboriginal industry. So, and Albert helped me develop many of the arguments. We developed many of these arguments together. My arguments are basically Albert's arguments with respect to the Aboriginal industry. So, Albert, before we begin, how come you became interested in this thing we call the Aboriginal industry?
Well, first of all, let's say what the Aboriginal industry is.
Good idea.
Whenever you have a question of money arising, you'll find an industry developing around that, getting under the money tree, which is, and that's exactly what the Aboriginal industry is. As soon as land claims agreements became land claims itself became an issue, a whole lot of people ran up and said, oh, there's money here. We're going to get in on this one. So you had all of these opportunistic people, consultants, lawyers, who were going to help them count the money. And they all got involved. So that's what the industry itself is. Something that develops and makes an industry out of something that wasn't that in the first place.
Okay, so we're talking about the Aboriginal industry. The Aboriginal industry, would you say, is a group of lawyers and consultants
Well, anybody who could get in on the possibility of getting their hands on some of that money.
The money that is being transferred to Aboriginal organizations.
Yeah, yeah.
So anyone who is representing Aboriginal organizations under the auspices that government money or just transfers in general, which should be going to Aboriginal communities, they intervene in that process and divert a large chunk of that money into the hands of what is called this industry. And the industry functions by creating more grievances. The grievances are really how money is increased for the Aboriginal industry and can be diverted into the hands of largely non-Aboriginal interests. But we do have a number of Aboriginal people now who are lawyers and consultants as well, who work for Aboriginal organizations.
Well, the leadership as well. The leadership has become corrupted by the fact that they can get in on the money under the money tree too.
Yes.
And that's what we have now in the Aboriginal circumstances and debates. What Aboriginal people really lack is educational facilities and health. They're both very far behind the commonality of the Canadian state and the Canadian society. And what are we giving them instead? Money. And money directly to the Aboriginal leadership, which I was really interested in a debate some time ago where an Aboriginal leader said that there was corruption galore in Aboriginal leadership, and there certainly is.
And the Aboriginal leadership is not very representative of the marginalized Aboriginal population. And this is what I think we would really like to stress. And this is kind of one of the slightly disconcerting aspects of having these conversations, is when you start talking about the Aboriginal industry and the corruption that is existing within the leadership, people start just saying things like, I've had enough of these Aboriginal people. We're just going to cut off all attempts at assistance. It's hopeless. But what we really need to address is the systemic problems that exist in how this whole area is being thought about. Is that it's not being thought about very rationally and very much based on evidence. And we need to get to actually getting at the roots of the problems. And a lack of money is not at the root of the problem, because we know that there's tens of billions of dollars that are going into this system every year. And maybe that's what it takes, but that money is not being spent on what you're talking about, which is, improving the educational levels in Aboriginal communities, addressing the health problems, one of the most serious being the fetal alcohol syndrome problem. There's a huge fetal alcohol syndrome problem, which is going to have generational effects. The serious housing problems that exist. All these things need to be addressed, and also the cultural kinds of problems which are related to the violence, the fetal alcohol syndrome, and so on, where the marginalized members of Aboriginal communities find it difficult to participate in what would be called working class positions. So just earning your livelihood, being able to show up from 9 o'clock to 5 o'clock every day, being able to work with people who you don't know, who are strangers, being able to have abstract forms of reasoning where you can put together a legal brief, or you can diagnose someone's illness, or whatever it, or be an engineer, being someone.
What you're saying is that there's a cultural gap here. We have Europeans came to the Americas with 2,000 years of civilization to groups of people who were living in in tribal systems, which did not have. One of the major things was, of course, literacy. You cannot become civilized unless you have literacy, because you can't write down what the laws are. So what you had was reciprocal challenges among tribal groups. If you took some of my land, I'm going to come and take some of yours, and we will fight over it. But there'll never be any deeds to the land in the first place. So and we have it now, claims for Aboriginal land because they're there. And that's just a reflection, a real indication of the cultural gap that we have between cultural formats and legal ones.
Okay, so you mentioned, and this is going to feed into one of the issues that we're going to be very interested in when I head to Kamloops next week, is there's been a recent decision called the Cowichan decision, which is making claims over private ownership in British Columbia. These cases have been ongoing now, since I guess the land claims started in about the 70s. And it was always about Crown land. That was always the kind of discussion that was happening. Now it seems that private property is now being challenged in terms of the ownership of that. And what we hear about when we enter into these discussions about these decisions is a concept by what is called Aboriginal title. What's your views on this idea? First of all, what is Aboriginal title, and what's your response to claims about this?
I don't know what can be said about Aboriginal title, because title is a legal term, and that means there's a piece of paper somewhere that determines that that this is yours, and that can always be used in a court of law or in any legal dispute. You can say, here it is, it says it's mine, and there can't be any argument about that. This is where it goes back to the point of literacy. Without literacy, without written laws, you do not have civilization. So now we have two cultures here, one that is pre-civilized. And the answer is not to reinforce this by giving Aboriginal rights to be uncivilized. We wanted to open the door to Aboriginal people, invite them into the modern period, into the post-Enlightenment period.
And I'm sure that there's going to be people who are listening to this who are going to be quite uncomfortable by those kinds of comments.
Sure, that's the Aboriginal industry.
And they're probably, if I'm going to make some assumptions, going to say that is very disrespectful at best for you to be saying that. And at worst, that sounds like a kind of a racist claim, possibly even a white supremacist claim.
Well, it has nothing to do with race, but
what is your reaction to that kind of response?
What is the insult, or is that what you said?
Disrespectful.
How is it disrespectful?
If I'm going to try to channel what it is that these people are arguing is that Aboriginal people, or they speak for all Aboriginal people, which we should never do that anyway. It's an absurd thing to do, but they would say, Aboriginal people have this way of thinking about themselves. This is very, very important to their sense of identity, their sense of self. And for you to deny that, for you to challenge that, is something with which they find it very difficult.
What I'm challenging is the racism inherent in that claim. They're saying because of their race, they do something. Whenever anybody does something or is claimed to do something because of their race, is racism. Because races don't make the difference. It's the cultural that is learned that makes the difference. We see a lot of Aboriginal people now who are very sophisticated and behave in a manner that is post-Enlightenment. They're educated. They have the same reasons and logic. They write books. They do all kinds of things.
Mm.
But what do we refer to when we talk about Aboriginals? Let's maintain their backwardness in their pre-Enlightenment period.
So do you have an example of that?
I'm not sure about an example of it.
What about, for example,
general
smudging?
argument.
Like, what about something like smudging? What's your views on having these smudging exercises before all sorts of official functions?
Smudging is just another ridiculous thing, like religion. You know, I can't go around making people not be religious.
But would you say that,
Like,
like if we're going to have, for example, at universities, I've got a bunch of administrators running around saying we got to have a smudging room because this is very, very important to Aboriginal people.
Well, that's part of the Aboriginal industry, keeping Aboriginal people back.
But do you see? Would you agree that
smudging
that
is silly?
But would you would you agree that that's kind of a what you would call or an undeveloped cultural or less developed cultural practice, which is being incorporated into an academic institution?
Absolutely.
Okay, so that's what we're talking about.
But
Is that kind
what
of
about
thing?
the encouragement of it?
Yes.
You know, and claiming, well, that's your right and that's your culture. Cultures evolve. And we're saying that Aboriginal people's culture shouldn't evolve. We keep telling them, and we tell young Aboriginal people that they should be maintaining this, and they fall for it.
Well, I think that's another thing to get into a little bit is Aboriginal people, younger Aboriginal people who are very hostile to any kind of critical discussions about what's happening. I think that it's important for younger Aboriginal people to realize that they are being shortchanged by what is being put forward by the Aboriginal industry. Yeah. Because what it does is, like many people who are doing these smudging exercises and so on, right? And this is very annoying because historically we worked very hard to get prayers and these sorts of things out of academic institutions. It used to happen because universities used to be religious institutions, but we fought and fought and fought to get the prayers out of universities. Now what we see is the prayers are being brought in, but they're being brought in under the auspices that this is somehow going to be helpful to Aboriginal students, Aboriginal faculty, and Aboriginal people in general. When what that is doing, it's actually encouraging irrational beliefs, which are preventing everyone from having the discussions that need to happen in universities about all sorts of topics. But the Aboriginal kind of area is one of the more sensitive, but Aboriginal people deserve the truth, just like everyone else does. And it is really, really maddening to see a whole bunch of non-Aboriginal people saying it's going to be beneficial for Aboriginal people if we don't really have honest conversations with them, that we should really pretend that we value these things like prayers and smudging, which most of my colleagues do not value. They pretend that they think this is beneficial when they would never do it themselves, and they would never do it for any other group, or certainly for what would be considered to be, a European, in a European context. So I think that it's very distressing to see the Aboriginal industry using Aboriginal people, especially using the marginalized Aboriginal people. And this is what brings me to one of the main topics that we're going to be talking about at Thompson Rivers University. And if you'll excuse me for one moment. Sorry, I'm just going to do this one. I have these billboards now, which have been
You have
produced.
to hold them farther back.
Sorry, I'm not holding it back. I'm just going to turn this camera a little bit. This is a billboard, a part of the sandwich board that has been produced. And this is the other part of the sandwich board that has been produced. And you'll notice on the bottom of that, there's Dallas Brodie holding the sign Zero Bodies in front of the misinformation that was being perpetuated by the Penticton Indian Band. And strangely, everyone got mad at Dallas Brodie for drawing attention to that falsehood when they didn't seem to mind at all that the Penticton Indian Band was the one that actually had the false information that was being perpetuated. So I don't understand how we can be upset at someone for telling the truth and not be concerned at all when false information is being disseminated. And it really is the double standard that Albert and I are talking about, is that, you know, Aboriginal people need to be included in honest conversations about what's happening, not condescended to and have people pretend to agree with them when they don't actually agree with them. So that's the whole purpose of what's going to be happening on November 12th, is to say we've had enough of the falsehoods that are being distributed.
But it's arrogance for us to assume that we know what's good for Aboriginal people.
Just want to move over a little bit more.
Are you listening?
Sorry, I just want you to move over so we can fill the screen properly. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
I forget what I was saying.
We're talking about the condescension towards Aboriginal people and the problems with that.
Well, I'm saying that there's an arrogance for us to say what Aboriginal people should be doing or what they need or anything. What they need is for us to stop telling them that. What they need to have their own process of development. They should be not introduced, but invited into the Enlightenment period. We shouldn't be constantly, what happens with the Aboriginal industry is constantly keeping Aboriginal people back in the period before the Enlightenment, which was tribalism. You're encouraging people to be tribalistic when we don't believe in being tribalistic. But it's not up to us to tell them not to. It's up to us to open the doors. Aboriginal people are now getting involved in the Aboriginal in the contemporary educational system. We have Aboriginal. I don't. If Aboriginal professors are smudging and going through all that nonsense, then they're condescending to their own people. And
well, they might believe it. To be fair to them, it might be something that they have absorbed and that they think is important.
Well, why don't they have us do it?
Well, they do sometimes do try to get you to do it.
No Aboriginal people that I know have ever asked me to smudge. Matter of fact, the Aboriginal people I know don't smudge.
Well, I've encountered this more recently, and perhaps it didn't happen 10 years ago, but it's happened in a few occasions where Aboriginal people take their smudging equipment and they start to smudge you.
Well, that is the result of the encouragement by the Aboriginal industry to keep them in their what term did I use before?
In a sort of a dependent and an isolated state.
The pre-civilized state.
A tribal kind
tribalism.
Of tribal kind of environment.
They're encouraging tribal culture. Why? We don't believe in that, but we say that's good for them. That's so condescending and so arrogant. It's just disgusting.
So do you think...
I don't think we should be... They should do, but we shouldn't be telling them we shouldn't be blocking them from entering the Enlightenment period.
And certainly should not be pretending to believe things that we do not believe ourselves.
Of course. Yeah.
Like if people want to believe in smudging, if people want to smudge Aboriginal people.
People are religious. Look at that crap that's going on all the time. You know, we were just celebrating the Pope a little while ago, but nobody said anything about that.
Okay, but
why should we be concerned about smudging? That's just as stupid as
well, it is a bit of a problem in terms of the air quality situation that does happen.
we're allowed to smoke pipes and.
No, but if you have a room that fills with smoke, then,
But
you
it
know, this is-
doesn't. Smudging is a small thing. It's just burning some particular kind of grass, and they go like this. And leave them alone. They're going to outgrow that.
yeah, okay. So I agree that it shouldn't be seen as being any different than any other
Yeah.
religious ceremony that is going to happen.
Exactly.
And, you don't go into a church and start to tell people that they shouldn't be praying and so on.
No.
So you're not going to go up to someone who's just, doing their own thing, smudging, that they shouldn't be smudging.
No, but we shouldn't encourage it either.
Yeah, so that's the
That's
problem.
condescending to
That's the
encourage
problem.
it.
So anyway, this is what we're seeing in all sorts of institutions now, is this kind of activity. And Aboriginal people can't be blamed if they think that people appreciate it, because people are coming up to them all the time and saying, can you do this? Can you hold this smudging ceremony here, and so on. So they think that a number of non-Aboriginal people think that this is a beneficial thing to be doing, when in all likelihood, Aboriginal people, non-Aboriginal people aren't or maybe some Aboriginal people too. We shouldn't be sort of having some kind of blanket kind of judgment. Anyway, so we're, in terms of Kamloops, trying to discuss this, the false claim that is made about the 215 remains being confirmed. What we're trying to do is we're trying to open up discussion about this claim, which, according to Thompson Rivers University, you shouldn't be having those discussions on their campus. What do you think about that, the position that Thompson Rivers University is taking?
Oh, well, I think it's nonsense. We shouldn't. Who are they to say that?
Well, they're saying, their claim of Steve Pottle is that Thompson Rivers University is on the first house of the Kamloops.
That's right. Yeah.
And so
is there any
therefore,
deed for that?
So that
No,
makes an interesting
stop.
question.
Well, Thompson Rivers should stop celebrating primitive cultural norms and invite Native people into the contemporary world. That's not to say we have to tell them they're wrong or anything, but we should be welcoming them into it.
Now, I know there's going to be some people who bristle at your use of the word primitive. Could you just explain what you mean by the word primitive?
Primitive is anything from a previous period.
Okay.
We use that term for a lot of things. When I heard somebody referring, there were some old manual typewriters, and somebody referred to that as primitive. The Model T Ford is a primitive vehicle. Anything that is prior, that came historically before the contemporary period, is primitive.
And so what was,
We're using it as a negative, like.
so a typewriter is
Manual
primitive,
typewriter is primitive.
primitive in comparison to an electric typewriter, and an electric typewriter would be primitive in comparison to a computer.
Yeah.
So it's not making a
Word
value.
processor.
So it's not making a value judgment about
No.
the moral or value of any person. And the reason why I wanted to clarify that is because I have seen people get very, very upset by the use of that term. And we just need to be able to talk clearly about these matters, because I think in terms of trying to create a better society, we have to properly recognize the problems that exist. And one of the problems is that it appears that people are arguing that the way to solve modern problems of distribution and production is to revert to a more primitive form. That's the argument that's made.
To return to a more primitive?
Yeah,
form?
to revert to a more primitive form is a way to solve modern problems of production and distribution.
Well, they'd have to support that with some kind of logic. It doesn't make sense.
Well,
Since when is going backward a good idea?
well, the logic is that because of the destruction that has happened in terms of the environment, because of the alienation that has occurred because of modern forms of production,
No,
it would just, if I can just finish the argument, and this is not my argument.
go on.
I'm just saying this is what would be say in order to solve problems of environmental contamination, such as the plastics. Like we have a massive plastics problem because plastics that are produced cannot be returned to their earlier form. So every single piece of plastic that's been produced over the last 70 years is still with us. And that would be the argument, is that in order to deal with that kind of problem that has been brought by modern technology, we should revert to a more primitive economic form.
No, it's not reverting to primitivism. It's recognizing that a mistake was made in the guise of progress. So when we have this in medical history shows us this all in many ways, that there were things that were done. Bleeding. Remember getting rid of the bad blood? No, that turned out not to be a good idea. But at the time, it was part of a progressive idea that if there was actually blood, not true, they bled people, and they found out there was no such thing as that, so they dropped that. And it's true of medicine has quite a few of these things in its history, but there are lots of others that plastics, the use of disposal, not plastic. We've got to have some plastic development is really positive, but it's permanent things that are plastic. They're lighter, they're strong, they're etc. So on. They don't rust. But we don't. What about plastic bags that we get every day and throw them away? All the disposable plastics.
Yes.
And what is the root cause of this? And what is the situation that occurs when we try to overcome it? Profit. The profit that is made by the profit that is generated by all of the things that are happening in our society that are negative, bad for society, is the fact that they are making profit because of capitalism. Now, if we didn't have capitalism, if we had a system that didn't produce products and services and goods for profit, but for human for the service of society and for human good, then that wouldn't remain.
Anyway, I'm just noticing people talking about the importance of the idea is not to deny that plastics, and I think you were mentioning that, Albert, that plastics for certain uses are obviously, if we didn't have them, it would be very, very difficult for society. But we're talking about all the plastics which are really
disposable,
which are not really necessary, and we could easily develop some other forms for it. But in terms of the Kamloops situation, which we're going to be talking about more next week at Thompson Rivers University, in terms of why do you think it's so difficult to tell the truth about this Kamloops claim, the false claim that was made at Kamloops?
I don't know enough about it to make a statement on that. But we must always look when something gets in the way of some other thing that is either done in the guise of progression or is really progress. We have to look at whose interest is being served here.
Okay.
And in many cases, the interests of profit really get in the way of true social progress, because there's no money in that. And one of them is stop having things. What we produce and socially is a lot of crap that isn't necessary and is in many cases harmful to us. You know, if you go into a grocery store, there are aisles that have nothing but sugar in different forms. Now, sugar is one of the worst things that we can eat. And we have to, but it's there's a huge. What was the great term? You make good cookies, Mr. Christie? That was a winner in the advertisement, right? No, you don't make good cookies. Cookies are bad for you, and children should not be getting cookies as a reward or anything like that. You know what children should get as a reward?
Cookies aren't good for you? Is that what you're saying? Uh-oh.
You know what's good for a kid? A ball.
But just in terms of the Aboriginal question, because that's really what we're trying to focus on. Like I realize, and this will have an impact on, how do you think that capitalism has impacted Aboriginal people, or how does this intersect with the Aboriginal question?
Well,
like some people say that the problem is that Aboriginal people don't have enough capitalism, that there should be
well, capitalists
there should
probably
be
say that.
there should be privatization of the reserves so that people own their own homes and so on, and it's really the brakes on capitalism.
Yeah, well,
Tom Flanagan, for example,
Tom Flanagan,
one of our colleagues.
just to mention Tom. Tom says that people should be able. He doesn't. Tom's a friend of mine, and he doesn't understand real estate. I'm sure he owns his own house, but he doesn't understand real estate if he thinks you can own your own land on a reserve. Because first of all, the reserve is a small area, so if you try to sell it, you can't sell it to somebody off reserve. That will keep the prices down because you don't have a big market, and you will be selling it to somebody you know. And the whole thing is, first of all, the answer to that is they should be sharing the land. They should be sharing the housing. They should be creating housing so there's enough for everyone. I know in my own experience and history and of real estate among Aboriginal people, is that there was a place in Yellowknife called the Rainbow Valley, I think it was, because all the different paint colors there. And somebody would get a house and 13 people would move into it, you know. That's because you need 13 houses, not one. But that's what happened. And, you know, you had the conflict the conflict between private ownership and serving the interests of everybody. And you can't do it with private ownership. You have to do it with social ownership. Yeah. And a really good socialist governing system that makes sure everybody is properly served. It's called socialism. read Karl Marx. He knows all about it.
Anyway, but one of the interesting things about the whole historical materialist perspective, and I myself would call myself an Orwellian socialist because I'm a person who takes seriously the works of George Orwell, and George Orwell's grappling with some of the difficulties of regimes that were trying to be socialist, such as originally in the Soviet Union and so on, and the difficulties that were achieved. But in terms of the Aboriginal population right now, in your view, what kinds of things should address the deprivation that is being experienced by Aboriginal people?
Well, the Aboriginal problem is a cultural problem. We're looking at, as I mentioned before, the culture of Europeans with 2,000 years of civilization coming into a tribal environment. And we have to allow Native people, we should stop encouraging this tribalism, which we are doing endlessly. And it's not up to us to be so arrogant as to say that's wrong, but to invite them to develop and progress into a civilized situation where you have written laws for a start. Aboriginal culture is all about not written laws. I mean, tribalism is not having anything written. It's, you know, the culture and the way they are, which is often referred to as their own laws. They don't have any laws. They don't have any laws because they don't have writing. And you can't have writing without laws. You can't have laws without writing.
So there's no such thing as an unwritten law.
There's no such thing as an unwritten law.
Because how would you determine what that law actually is?
Yeah, that reference to an unwritten law is just to an accepted cultural determination.
It's a custom
that nobody argues with.
Yeah.
So it performs like a law, but nobody has bothered to write it down. But all you need is one person to violate it, and you've got a fight.
So
you can't point to a law and say this is where I'm right. They say no, it isn't.
Yeah, well, this is Lewis Henry Morgan, who was the anthropologist who
Yeah.
sort of studied this transition from tribalism to civilization. He was arguing that it's a transition from kinship-based forms of social organization, so organization based upon one's biological relationships and marriage relationships, to societies where you have a geographical area that has laws enforced over that geographical area. And that is a big distinction. And I think that what we're seeing in British Columbia right now with all these kinds of disputes, that it should be stressed, the Aboriginal industry has been working on since the 70s. So this is a long time in the making. And we're just beginning to realize that it's not functional in the civilized context, because what you see when you're looking at these disputes is a whole bunch of overlapping claims. And the reason why you have overlapping claims is because you did not have a surveyed area where it was understood that that was the area that was quote unquote owned by this particular group. Now we're going to have to spend the next many decades having a bunch of Aboriginal industry consultants arguing in court about land use patterns and so on, and which group, has more of a claim, a justified claim to one area or another, when what we really need to be doing is saying, are all those arguments that are going to be going on endlessly in the legal system, is that really in the best interests of the marginalized Aboriginal population, which is the rationale for why we should be doing this. Every time you hear people talking about why should we be going through all this truth and reconciliation processes and so on, is because Aboriginal people as an aggregate have a lower quality of life than non-Aboriginal people. So that's seen as being a problem, and we want to address that. But I don't think the legal system is going to be the way in which those problems are addressed.
Well, first of all, Aboriginal people are in a situation where they produce very little, which puts them into a conflict with the working class, which produces everything. Mm. All value comes from labor, and the Aboriginal people don't participate in the labor force. So you've got a conflict right there. What has to happen is the gap in culture here has to be overcome. We can't keep congratulating people on smudging and other nonsensical bullshit and invite them into the world where we don't do that, where the world of universalism, where, as Karl Marx said, we really need to be looking at Marx, workers of the world unite. Not workers in France compete with workers in Italy, but workers right across the board. Erase those lines and see that the workers of the world produce all of the value in the world. Now, what are we going to do with the production there? Well, let's share it. No, let's compete with each other. All you have to do is read the Globe and Mail and the report on business in the morning. You see, it's all about people competing with each other. Nobody cooperating. We got who's got more of this and who's got more of that and so on. That's encouraged. And what it does is it causes conflict among workers. Rather than the workers of the world uniting, you've got the workers in France competing with the workers in somewhere else.
So you would argue that the Aboriginal population should become part of the working class?
Oh, of course. They should be invited into the working class. They should be invited. As soon as you're a worker, you have a lot of power. You know what you can do? What do workers do? It's a big universal acceptance. They withhold their labor. As soon as you do that, you've got it. Let's say the bosses withhold their labor. Let's say the political leaders don't go to work tomorrow. Who gives a shit? But if the workers don't go to work, we won't produce any food. What if farmers are workers, and farmers who refuse to produce milk and meat and grains and stuff. What are we going to do then? We're going to do what they want. And if the farm, first of all, farms should not be individually owned. They should be collectives.
Okay.
Where these farmers that own farms now would do the same thing. They'd just be managers of farms rather than worrying about whether they're going to make a profit next year.
So, people, we've got an audience that's listening to all of this. And, you know, this is related because we're trying to sort through many of the problems that we have in society. And there are different debates that go on that we used to have in the universities all the time, you know, capitalist economic system versus a socialist economic system. But we've gotten sidetracked from these kinds of discussions because of relativistic positions which argue that there is no such thing as an objective truth, and it's just your truth or my truth or your grandmother's truth, these kinds of things. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to restore the intellectual space to be one where we can have, Albert and I know Tom Flanagan. He's a classical liberal, thinks that capitalism is the best way to solve problems. We are of the different flavors of the socialist variety, but we still can have arguments with one another and we can try to figure things out. And that's kind of the question now for universities, in particular, Thompson Rivers University, which is going to be happening next Wednesday, which is November 12th at 1:00 p.m. at Student Street. We are going to be discussing the question of what remains, whether the remains of 215 children have been confirmed at the Kamloops Indian Residential School, and also saying zero bodies, is that denialism? Because we've heard about this allegation of denialism, or is that truth? Or what's the difference between denialism and truth? Can some forms of truth actually be denialism? And that's what we're going to be trying to engage people with at Thompson Rivers University. But we have about 10 minutes left on the live stream. And we're wondering if people have questions that they would like to ask either Albert or me while we're still here. So you can just put your questions in the chat if you'd like us to answer some questions.
Nobody's interested.
It's just they've been chatting with each other so much that now we haven't had. I'm just thinking about a good one to okay, here we go. The Murray sisters. I'm just trying to think of a good question that I can ask you, Albert.
Well, there was a thing in the Globe the other day.
Sorry, how much total has been spent on digging? So that means excavating the unmarked graves. 300. The government at some point allocated $320 million, or 310 or $320 million for unmarked graves searches. Now, actually, how much of that got spent, we're not entirely sure. The one excavation that has happened is at Pine Creek in Manitoba, and they spent 4 weeks with an archaeological team digging through the soil in the basement of a church. So it'd be interesting to find out how much that cost to do that excavation. But in Kamloops, the excavation is not as advanced, not as complex as Pine Creek because it's out in the open. And I would suggest just doing a few, sort of excavations in a few areas which are on the anomalies, the most significant anomalies, which they have stakes. They have put stakes over where all these anomalies are. Could just do an excavation of 10, 20 anomalies, get an archaeological. It probably would not cost more than, I would imagine, $50,000 would be my guess. I don't know how much these things cost, but really we need to have excavations at Kamloops. It just is not acceptable for the band to say, oh, well, that's it. We're not going to do anything now. because when they've got $12.1 million, that was the allocation. I believe $3 million specifically was allocated towards excavations. And that $3 million especially should be spent on these excavations. Okay, Daniel is asking the question, if you could have a panel with anybody on a university campus, who would you like to have it on campus with? Well, from the Aboriginal file, I'm not sure if, I would say Aaron Pete. Aaron Pete would be my choice. Aaron Pete is the chief of the Hope Band, and we had a great conversation, and that would be fantastic. What about you, Albert? If you had a panel, if you had to be on a panel.
I don't understand the reason for the question.
Well, if you wanted to have a university discussion, who would you want to have a university discussion with?
Oh, I don't know.
Is there someone that you think would be Albert?
Well, I'd have to look through the people who are appropriate and look at what they've done and so on. I don't know enough about them.
You did have a good
It's not
conversation
popular.
with Tom Flanagan. You had
Yeah,
some
sure.
good, so it would be
No,
great.
I thought you meant Aboriginal.
Or it could be Aboriginal people as well. But Tom Flanagan and Albert had a great conversation about property rights on First Nations communities, whether that was the solution to some of the dependency that existed, which I thought was a fascinating discussion. It's a pity that that was not recorded. Security at Thompson Rivers. I'm not really very concerned about it. University of Winnipeg, I think, was a special situation because it was downtown Winnipeg, and all the gangsters showed up who were inhabiting downtown Winnipeg. So suburban university campuses tend to be much lower key. We also have a lot of supporters who are going to be there this time, but this will be a test for Thompson Rivers University.
But they should be supplying the security.
Yes.
It's an event on the university grounds.
Yes. Well, at University of Winnipeg, security just stood down and did nothing. Like, it was just terrible. Daniel, was feared for his life, was pushed off campus. Security saw people doing that to him and did nothing about it. And then, of course, the police were called several times and never showed up. So that was another massive failure. And then we found out 2 days after the University of Winnipeg meltdown that Geraldine Shingus, who was one of the people who assaulted me, she was invited by the police to give a talk at their sacred fire ceremony on whenever that was, September 29th. So the Winnipeg police are completely captured by the Aboriginal industry. Illegal for a normal citizen to start digging at a so-called unmarked grave site. It depends on where that is. If it's public land, then that's a different issue. On Aboriginal lands, that is land that's controlled by the Aboriginal group. So that would be a serious problem if people started doing that there. But it's really the band. The band's got $3 million to be doing the excavation. So all we need is for the government to put pressure on the Kamloops Indian Band. But instead of putting pressure on the Kamloops Indian Band, the government allocated another $12.5 million for a healing center. And the healing was to help the Aboriginal people in that group overcome the trauma that had been caused by all these claims about clandestine burials on the site. So for people who are concerned about Aboriginal people being traumatized, why do they not want excavations to take place so that we can determine whether there are actually remains there or not? It doesn't make any sense in terms of that case. Someone is asking you a question about Karl Marx, Albert. Are you a true believer in Karl Marx's theories as postulated in Das Kapital?
Yes.
So there you have it. And what do you think is the most convincing kind of theoretical idea that came out of Das Kapital?
Well, Capital is a huge number of books. But the greatest thing, I guess, for contemporary usage is the idea and existence and acknowledgement of class in society.
Mm.
And that is what we should be discussing and looking at. And we look at our media. It's all about the upper classes. It's all about things, and I call this a thing, like Donald Trump. I mean, we have a society now that has this as one of its leaders, this unbelievable creep. And how many people in our universities and our high schools know anything about Karl Marx? Karl Marx is the most important philosopher of the contemporary period. And if we read more of him, I'm not suggesting anybody read Karl Marx directly anyway, because he's so complex. But Vladimir Lenin and Leon Trotsky have done a really good job of interpreting him and making room for a lot of discussion about Marx. The fundamental thing about Marx, though, is the emphasis on particularism and universalism. The two distinctions. And particularism causes conflict all the time. Universalism causes cooperation. So if we see ourselves universally as a species, we want to support and maintain the species. If we see ourselves as individual nations competing with one another, we'll have wars. And that's what we have.
Mm. And George Novak, his book "Understanding History," that's sort of written in a manner which is easier to grasp than
a good example.
The very kind of dense kind of writing of Karl Marx. Yes, in terms of question for me, Juno News and Rebel News is going to be there. Yes, I don't know about Rebel, but Juno News is going to be there. Juno is supporting the documentary that Simon Harrogott and I are producing on the Kamloops case, and they have, and actually I believe it was Kean Bexty. That was one of the first documentaries that came out, called The Mass Grave Hoax, that he and Lauren Southern did. And so it would be very interesting to talk to him about what he thinks about the current unmarked graves kind of situation, the claims about unmarked graves, especially the Kamloops case. So this is about the British Columbia situation. So this is about the land claims in British Columbia. This is a very interesting question as to why the NDP government is sort of supporting these Aboriginal title claims, or at least being reluctant. That seems to be the case. I still don't have all the documents about this, but it appears that the British Columbia government was reluctant to argue against Aboriginal title claims. And this is a huge, huge problem, because, as I mentioned, Aboriginal title claims are not very rational, because they're based upon sort of occupancy of groups that were not surveyed, not similar to claims that are made in other kind of civilized contexts. And the question is, why are they doing that? And there's a lot of sort of arguments put forward about that. One is obviously the Aboriginal industry type of side, avoiding dealing with trying to actually address Aboriginal problems. The other is the international forces that are at work with things like the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And then finally, I was just having a really interesting discussion today with Kathleen Lowry, who's an academic from University of Alberta. And she was making arguments about how the existing system is declining, and governments are trying to get people used to accepting less. They're trying to justify the decline in living standards, which are occurring. And she argues that they're using Aboriginal people as kind of a front to do this. So by having all sorts of property taken away, or at least made uncertain, people finding it more and more difficult to survive, this is tied in with these kinds of developments that are occurring using Aboriginal people as a kind of pawn, I guess, in this situation. Anyway, these are very complex kinds of arguments. Other questions people have? Sorry, there's a lot of I'm trying to follow the print. And I'm looking at, I'm just trying to find a simple, because there's a lot of text here. Final thoughts, Albert?
Oh, well.
In terms of maybe bring it back to Aboriginal policy. In terms of, if you were to say one thing about Aboriginal policy, what would you say?
Well, I would say that we have to acknowledge the huge gap in our cultures, which is really prohibitive to us making progress in relation to Aboriginal people. We have to stop. We can't be so arrogant as to tell them there's something wrong with their culture, but we should not encourage it in any way, but we should promote the civilized culture to them.
And in terms of my final thoughts is just Brodie, the kind of smears that she's been receiving from Chief Stuart Phillip and Terry Teegee. I really think we have to seriously look at the Aboriginal industry, the funding that the Aboriginal industry is receiving. I think that should be defunded. Everything that's going into the legal grievances and so on. And what we need to think about is providing the services that Aboriginal people actually need. That's what needs to be thought out in a very sensitive way, because I know it's not easy in terms of what's got to happen. It's been done very, very poorly in the past. There's a lot of distrust, but we're just all human beings. We're all human beings that we need the same basic things. We need education, we need housing, we need healthcare, we need enough good quality food and high quality water and all these sorts of things. And many Aboriginal people living in the urban ghettos, in the remote Aboriginal communities, are not receiving what they need to survive. And the reason for that is because the billions of dollars that go to Aboriginal causes are going into these legal disputes and all these various consultancy fees. And that's not doing anything to assist the marginalized Aboriginal population. Anyway, so we've come up to an hour. I think it's been a very interesting discussion that we've had, Albert. And for people who are in Kamloops, please join us at that's going to be myself, Will Dove, Dallas Brodie, and Jim McMurtry at Thompson Rivers University, 1:00 p.m. Pacific at Student Street. I hope to see you there. Thank you very much for watching.